Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our informational panel session on the Prop 206 campaign that is coming to effect on January 1st. I just want to let everybody know that we are recording the session today for our other members of Local First Arizona statewide that are unable to attend. So you'll be able to ask questions, even though it looks super formal up here. We are going to open up for questions the entire time. So as things come into your mind, or if you've come with questions, you are going to be more than welcome to ask them the entire time. My name is Thomas Barr, and I'm the Director of Operations at Local First Arizona. Is everybody in the room a member of Local First? Raise of hands. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, great. So just to kind of get a feel for the room before I introduce our panelists, how many people in the room are in the retail industry? Okay, what about restaurants? And then any nonprofits in the room? Okay, anything else? Manufacturing? What's that? Services. Okay, business services. Okay, great. So mostly restaurants, retail, business services, a few nonprofits in the room, maybe a few others here and there. But I mean, overall, we're doing this for all of you today because as this comes into effect, it's affecting all of the businesses in Arizona. And we want our members to be able to create strategies together and collaborate and work with each other to set a plan in action to be able to work with these changes that are coming into effect. And so we reached out to a few of our members that have put strategies and plans and different things into their models of business to be able to work with the changes already. And we wanted to have them share their ideas with you. And then also we brought on an attorney that that is very well versed on the legalities behind everything and the proposition, and can answer all of those types of questions for you today. So I want to start by introducing our panelists. The first, and also I want to reiterate our first two panelists that I'm going to introduce are members of Local First Arizona, longtime members, and I don't want you to think of them as the experts, but more so as a shared resource for you. The expert's going to be down at the end, and I'm going to introduce him in a minute. But the first that I'm going to introduce is Julie Meeker. She's the owner of Mother Bunch Brewing in Phoenix. And then next to her, we have Doug Robson, the owner of Otro Cafe over in Phoenix. And then our attorney is Matt Anderson, partner at Jaburg and Wilk law firm in Phoenix. So I'd like to go through really quickly and just have each of our panelists introduce yourselves, tell us about your company, and then we'll get into some more questions, that kind of stuff, as we go through.
All right, so we've been in business. Mother Bunch Brewing is in downtown Phoenix, near the Roosevelt neighborhood. We're sort of a cross between a restaurant and a manufacturing facility because making beer is considered manufacturing, and we do distribute a little bit of it outside of our walls so far. So we're dealing with this just like everyone.
Good morning. My name is Doug Robson. I own Otro Cafe. I'm a chef owner. I've been in the restaurant business since I was 16. I left my chef job and became a business owner in 2009, and it's been a huge learning curve. But at the same time, it's it's very stimulating, and I'm excited to be here to share our story with you guys. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Matt Anderson, and thank you for calling me the expert on these issues. I appreciate it. I will say that these issues haven't been litigated yet, so we don't know where some of the pitfalls will be, but we will soon learn, if any, and hopefully I'll give you guys some ideas for implementing Prop 206. So I've been an attorney for 10 years, devote my practice to defending businesses in lawsuits by other businesses, employees, and customers with a specific attention to retail, restaurant, and hospitality.
Great. So just to go over Prop 206 really quickly, and specifically what is taking effect starting January 1st, 2017. On January 1st this coming year, the minimum wage will increase to $10 per hour. It will then raise 50 cents to be $10.50 starting in January 2018. It will then go up to $11 an hour on January 1st, 2019, and then $12 an hour January 2020. Additionally, it includes the paid sick time for part-time and temporary employees. Paid sick time accrues at 1 hour per 30 hours worked, up to 40 hours per year for large employers that have 15 or more employees. And then if you have less than 15 employees, that is up to 24 hours per year, as you're considered a small employer. So I kind of just want to start out before we get to Julie and Doug with you, Matt, on can you break that down a little easier for everybody just so that we have a clear idea of what exactly that means for everybody's business?
Sure. So as Doug said, as Tom said, if you have any questions during the presentation, either speak up, raise your hand.
We'll take the mic around to you, so yeah.
Right. So as far as breaking down that comment, I put together some salient points. The law itself is not terribly lengthy, and so it's fairly self-explanatory, but I did want to highlight a few areas. I gave a talk on Prop 206 a few weeks ago to the Arizona Retailers Association, and members of that association are much larger retailers, and I suspect that most of those businesses did not fall under the exemption. The key exemption here is that this Paid Sick Time Act, or the paid sick time that's mandatory as of July of next year, July 1, that does not apply to small businesses. And you can see there at bullet point 2, the exception to that implementation. Small businesses are exempt, and that's defined as a business that has a gross annual revenue of less than $500,000. And there's a second provision as well, a second prong. It's an and, not an or. The and is that the business must be engaged in interstate commerce. And you may ask yourself, well, what does that mean? Generally, it means impacting commerce in some way, whether you're actually selling goods, whether you're offering services that cross state lines, somehow impacting the commerce of another state. That would be interstate commerce. So again, small businesses exempt if gross revenue is less than $500,000 and not engaged in interstate commerce or in the production of goods. That should say goods, not good. I know you're all engaged in good business. Or in the production of goods for interstate commerce. And then, of course, I don't know whether this applies to any of you all, but state of Arizona employees and federal workers are also exempt from the mandatory paid sick time. So again, 15 or more employees, the 40 hours per year. Do you want me to just go through the entire act? Or what?
A little bit. We had a question over here, though, going on. Yeah.
Am I an employee? I pull a paycheck like everybody else does, and I work a couple of shifts. I own the business, but I'm on that edge. If 15 is the nut, am I an employee? Or because I own it, I don't count?
So really quickly before, we just want to make sure the camera gets it. He's asking over here if, as an owner of a business, you're an employee of a business, right?
Am I one of the 15?
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So again, this is very, very critical. One of the questions that I was getting at the last conference is, well, how do we define an employee? What if it's a seasonal worker or temporary worker or someone who's been let go and then rehired? The definition of an employee for purposes of Prop 206 should be read as broadly as possible. And again, I would always err on the side of being more cautious than I suppose, freewheeling with some of the definitions. So an employee means any person who is or was employed by an employer, but does not include someone who's employed by a parent or a sibling or a family member or in babysitting services. So that's means just about everyone.
Okay, great. We had a question here.
Since you're talking about employees, I know that we get kind of iffy on independent contractors, but if we're complying with the 1099 status as defined federally, then we don't have an employee situation here, right?
Correct. If you as the business owner exclude independent contractors from your calculation of who's an employee and who's not, I mean, it's not worker, it's employee. So you're absolutely right.
Okay, and then we had one more in the back, and then I've got a question for Julie and Doug.
So actually, how would 15 employees be calculated? Because it's seasonal fluctuations. For instance, I could have as high as 20 and as low as 9, but my average is probably about 14.
Right, and the Act provides for that. If you haven't yet, find Prop 206 online and read all of it, because it's fairly self-explanatory. It's not lengthy. I wouldn't say it's a fun read, but It's something that you should read. So the short answer to your question is it's an average, but I'm looking for the length of time over which you're averaging that. It's a week or two, but let me look. Right, so it's in, well, you all don't have it in front of you, but subpart C, in determining the number of employees performing work for an employer for compensation during a given week, all employees performing work for compensation on a full-time, part-time, or temporary basis, and that's the broad definition I was referring to, shall be counted in situations in which the number of employees who work for an employer for compensation per week fluctuates above and below 15 employees. An employer is required to provide earned sick time if it maintained 15 or more employees on the payroll for some portion of a day in each of 20 different calendar weeks. So it's fairly technical, so that obviously shows how important the tracking is. You're looking at me very confused right now. Let me read that one more time. If the employer maintained 15 or more employees on the payroll, so on the payroll, not necessarily working, but on the payroll, for some portion of a day in each of 20 different calendar weeks. All right, so again, you got to be tracking this stuff because you're never going to remember that.
If I can jump in, do you use a payroll company? No? Okay. Payroll companies that we've used, we've implemented health insurance. What they do is they provide a report for you that will be able to give you the right answer. So one of the things that I've been working on with the HR company is how we're going to implement that, and they're going to help us with the reporting to be able to find out where we need to be. So you could always get advice from payroll companies too on how to operationalize it.
Just so I can get clear in my mind. So if I own a vitamin store and I'm selling vitamins, or a used tire shop, and my business is earning below 500,000, does that put me at, so I wouldn't have to provide payday sick time if I'm under 15 employees? Is that what you're saying?
Irrespective of the number of employees you have, you might get into FMLA issue, the Family Medical Leave Act issue at that point. But if you have, regardless of the number of employees you have, if you have gross revenue, gross, not net, less than 500,000, and then the other provision, not engaged in interstate commerce or production of goods for interstate commerce, then you're exempt from the paid sick time provision. Right. So again, it's a loose definition. Obviously, commerce, can be viewed synonymously with business. So if you're impacting business in other states for some reason, whether you're direct selling goods, vitamins to consumers in other states, or whether you are shipping to other states, whatever the situation may be, you're impacting interstate commerce. But if your business is isolated and limited to Arizona, then not interstate commerce.
So I have a follow-up question to that. So if you're selling online and people are buying things from you out of state, is that interstate commerce then?
Yes.
Okay. So I do, now that we have this brief overview of some of the legalities behind the paid time off, and we know the structure of how the minimum wage is increasing and all that kind of stuff, I would like to ask Julie and Doug to take a moment to just kind of give a brief overview of, did you plan for this before? How long has it taken? Have you already implemented any changes? What is your strategy for taking this on? Have you implemented things before? How is this, going to affect the type of people that you hire? I'm sure a lot of people have these types of questions as they're running their own company. So if you could just give a brief overview of kind of some of the strategies that you've set in place, that'd be great.
Doesn't matter to me.
I'll go first. So, some of the things that we've done, we came across some challenges. When we opened our restaurant, one of them was retention of employees. We started to see what everybody else was doing, especially our competition. The Sam Foxes, the big companies out there. And they have a market advantage because they have these benefits and perks to work in these companies. So for me, I want to be competitive in the marketplace. So I went through and started figuring out how to offer health insurance. And the reality is we have 15 full-time employees, and we have 17 part-time employees. So, out of the percentage of people that got health insurance was very small. We have 9 people that have health insurance. So, and these are people that I consider being instrumental to the company. So losing them was not an option. After we did that exercise and we came across with Prop 206, we went through the exercise. How much is this really going to cost us? The majority of the increases for us is not going to be in the back of the house. The average person in my kitchen makes $13 an hour. My dishwashers make $12 an hour. So it really came down to the front of the house. And so we did the math. We calculated how many hours on average they work a month. And we figured out what that number was. And we built that. We added our payroll tax, and we added that back into the operations, and including Prop 206. Well, we estimated that it's going to be an additional $4,800 a month of increases. So we looked at our product mix, and we averaged out over the 12 months, how many units we sell. So we went through the whole exercise. Okay, do we take our top selling items and we increase the price? And for me, I had a problem with that because, I own a Mexican restaurant, and, you don't want to have $5 tacos. So, I said, instead of doing that, I went back and thought about some of my experiences. I remember growing in the restaurant business when there was changes in payroll. You would see coffee go from a dollar to $1.05. So we just took that approach and went and did a blanket amount all the way across our menu. And the increase all the way across our menu was 15 cents. So for us, it's more palatable to increase our menu pricing by 15 cents and have a compelling reason to explain it to people than to just, put it all on just your top selling items. So that's kind of some of the things that we did to kind of be ready for it. We're implementing the menu change in a couple weeks. We're ready to go on it, and we're hoping for the best. So
Great, thanks, Doug. Let's take a couple questions before we get to Julie. Yeah.
So with that, you're increasing your front of staff pay. Is that affecting at all your back of staff? Do you fear that they're going to be like, oh, well, why don't we get a raise too?
No, because some of the things that I'm a chef by training, so I have an advantage that I have the experience in that area. I run it lean already, and I rather have 2 cooks at $15 an hour than 3 cooks at $10 an hour. It's still about promoting high standards, promoting performance, and ultimately, it does come down to how many people do you really need in your business, and it helps. It's helped me kind of really look at it and really go, am I really running it the most efficient way as possible? Am I really, hitting the marks? It is challenging. I like to keep a lean staff on, and because every employee you have to pay for the payroll expenses that go along with that. So keeping it lean and really compensating talent is the name of the game. And I think that most people who are in business, that's the way they do it. So.
And Doug, when are you rolling out your price increases?
We're rolling it actually in a couple weeks, right before January. So we're ready to go, and we might as well pull the trigger on it. Plus, we're doing some drink changes and adding some stuff on the menu. So it's also because we want to have fun with the menu. So.
Great, thanks so much, Doug. Just before we move on to Julie, we have a question over there. Okay, I'll be right there. We actually had a restaurant owner come down from Seattle who owns a chain of restaurants, because Seattle's been at $15 minimum wage for a couple of years now, I think, and kind of gave some advice on, as these minimum wage increases continue to happen, and if you are planning on increasing prices or those different types of things, suggested being in front of the game and doing those things before the law actually gets passed, because everybody's kind of going to be waiting for it on that January 1 date. And although there was not that much time to prepare between November 8th and January 1st this year, looking toward the future, she highly suggested, as those increases start to happen, if you are going to increase prices, to look at increasing those before the actual law comes into effect, so that people aren't sitting on your door waiting for those prices to come up. So we got Monica. Yeah, could you pass?
So I was wondering if at your restaurant, if you guys have implemented any changes in expectations for your staff, specifically front of house, either this year or leading up to this change, or if you have even more changes planned for the coming year just to realign duties with, I guess, the compensation that's now going to be provided.
You know, I think that you know, part of our industry, each of us in the restaurant industry or whatever industry you're in, you know, you have baggage. You know, there's a lot of bad habits in the restaurant business that come from, you know, the fact that they're not getting paid minimum wage and they're tipped employees. So there is this kind of feeling of disparage, you know, of the amount of work you have to do to the amount of money that the company pays. So, you know, it is a tough dynamic. One of the things that I think that we're looking to do is a policy change is, you know, part of the Prop 206, you know, you can change some of the things that you do, some of the benefits you already give your staff, like employee meals, and maybe limiting the amount of employee meals that you give out, because that is actually a way of compensating your employees without really compensating them, is giving them free meals. I did the math, and on average, we give about $4,000 of employee comps. Our employees love to eat the food. So, you know, I think that, you know, when we introduce it to our staff, when we have our meeting, we're going to, you know, present it as, you know, hey, we're going to reduce this here, but what you're going to get in return is you're going to get paid time off. And I think that for most people, they would much rather have a paid day off because you're sick or you're dealing with life, or, you know, all these things that happen to us, versus, you know, getting 30% off on your food. So, I mean, I know they like the food, but, you know, I think they'd rather have the day off. So.
Great. We have another question back here.
I have a question in raising the prices. Did you calculate the increased tip that the server is going to get on the higher price of the food and the payroll taxes that are associated with that?
No.
No.
Not really. And to be honest, I'm more concerned about the extra $2 an hour that you're paying. I did calculate payroll tax into it, but to be honest, you know, I think that it's a starting point, and really it's about reducing the amount of reduced capital expenses that you have to accrue. And so we'll reevaluate that. That's a good question. We'll see how that turns out.
Great, thanks. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
One other thing I want to share to piggyback on what Doug is saying, if anyone is considering reducing the number of employees you have or consolidating from part-time to full-time or whatever it may be to reduce payroll expenses, just make sure that you're not doing so in response to an employee wanting to use paid sick time. So the two should not be should be done concurrent. They should not be done concurrently, because otherwise that could be viewed as retaliation, which is obviously explicitly prohibited and is a bad thing under the Act.
Great, thank you. Before we get to another question, I do want to get to Julie. Doug, how long has Otro Cafe been open?
It'll be 4 years in March.
Great. And then Julie, I know that you just celebrated your 1 year anniversary of Mother Bunch. 2 year.
2 years in September.
So why don't you tell us about your plan and strategy and that kind of stuff? You've had a lot going on in the past 2 years, so I know
Yeah.
everybody wants to hear from you too.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. Just like Doug, our back of house folks were all making well over minimum wage to begin with. But we kind of took a little bit different approach. We looked at what our labor cost is and sort of what the percentage increase is going to be, and then kind of back that into our menu prices. And we're going to take a little bit bigger of a jump on our menu prices. Once again, we've only been in business for 2 years, and we've never raised our prices, so far. And we're doing pretty well, hitting those industry, standard marks that you're looking for, food costs and labor costs and things like that. We also have that manufacturing component. Once again, those folks were already making over minimum wage. We are going to give everyone an increase across the board. I think that, to me, that seems fair because, why should just the lowest end people, be brought up to that $2 an hour? So we looked at that total across the whole menu, and it kind of averages maybe like $1 per menu item. We'll also probably charge a little bit more for our distributed beer to wholesale, to retail customers to cover that cost of the increased wages in the back of house as well. We also plan to not just, we're going to expand the paid sick time and just call it paid time off. I really don't care why you need the time off, I think that should be up to you to use it responsibly and to manage that as well. And that's all going to be part of our policy on top of that.
If that's your policy and this goes for everyone, just make sure that's in writing and share with your employees.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I shared with Thomas, and you're welcome to share. I've, kind of created the paid time off policy document as well as a paid time off form.
And I would even add to that, this is in compliance with the prop and cite the prop, because you're kind of doing something in lieu of calling it paid sick time. So I would make, if I were you.
The definition does say you can use it for all of the reasons that they have here, as well as any personal reason.
Exactly.
Yeah. I made sure, covered that. I did have a question, though. Where did they come up with the, I'm asking my own question, the 1 hour per 30 hours? So when I was in the real world, as an employee, right, they basically took that 40 hours as a full-time employee, and you earned, that component of 40 hours each hour over that pay period. So I'd come up with a figure about like 0.0193, I think, was what that comes down to. But this is like a third of an hour. So even your full-time employees are going to reach that 40-hour max at about 1,200 hours.
Right. All I can say, I'm just frankly guessing, but looking at other jurisdictions, other states, what they've done, how they've rolled that out, and then with the goal in mind of not having employees accrue more than 40 hours per year, I suppose, then they
So you can absolutely cap it, though, at 40.
Yes. You don't have to, but you can.
Okay. It's also not clear about how much they can carry over. They carry it all over forever? Or can your policy say you can accrue, the most you can have at any one time is 80 hours?
You can always go above and beyond what the prop requires, but you can roll over theoretically an indefinite amount, but you just can't use more than 40 hours per calendar year. So, it's useless to roll over, 200 hours if you can only use 40.
And I noticed in your briefing it says also that you are not you don't have to pay them upon termination for
Right.
that accrued.
Right. So that's a misconception, is that this is a paid benefit. It's not. So if you separate from the business, it's not a benefit, a paid benefit you take with you. However, if you are reinstated in your employment within 9 months thereafter, that unused accrued sick time is reinstated.
But if she's calling it PTO, doesn't she have to pay it out? If she calls it PTO and it's PTO
Once
for
again, it
vacation,
depends on
or
what I put in my policy.
If that's what her policy says, yeah.
automatically have to pay out PTO if it's not in your policy.
Correct. But if you're calling it PTO, you got to treat it like PTO and pay it out.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Exactly.
So she has to pay, whereas if you separate your vacation and your sick, you pay out the vacation, but you don't have to pay out the sick.
Right. So she's going above and beyond. Exactly.
Do we have any other questions right now? Okay.
With the part-time, how do you, and you have different lengths of shifts, how do you determine if they want to take a sick day, and let's say their average is 4.5 hours on their normal, so you know, do I do 4.5 or do I do the 5.5? How do I figure out? It's not an 8-hour day for my staff for a sick day or sick time.
Right. So
Do they submit the hours? They want to take 2 hours off for a doctor's appointment, something like that?
right. Are you talking about using the time or accruing the time? Okay. So if you're comfortable with how it's accrued, then they can use it in increments that don't overly disrupt the business, and they have to give you notice of that if it's for a foreseeable reason. And so, right. Okay. So, right. So your situation is a little unique. I think irrespective of the length of their shift, they still submit for the number of hours they need off. And so if their full workday is 4.5 hours, well then that's the amount of time they're taking off. They're not taking off 8 hours of paid sick time. Right. Right. And I would say this. So if I litigate, and so in looking at areas that may be litigated, I think we'll see situations where there's always the potential for abuse, of course. And so the paid sick time has got to be for a qualified purpose. And that's the second bullet point, which is mental or physical illness of the employee. That makes sense. Caring for a family member's mental or physical illness, that also kind of makes sense. Public health emergency, well, what is that? That's kind of nondescript. Domestic violence, sexual violence, or stalking, that'll probably be rare, but could happen, and does happen. And so to the extent those reasons are foreseeable, the employee has to provide the employer notice of that, and the employer absolutely does have the right to ask for documentation of that purpose, and that's not inappropriate, but I would caution you to, well, one thing you'll need to be aware of is, when you're going to grant that leave versus deny it, and so just be cautious if you're denying it, you have a viable reason for doing so.
Matt, just to add to her question, so we, in the restaurant, let's just say we have 3 people on the floor, and then after lunch it slows down, you send somebody home or whatnot. I think that's what, at least for me, is it an average of what they work for the week? Because sometimes they might be there 4.5 hours, sometimes they might be there 6.5 hours. Does that make sense?
If I could speak to this, when I worked in construction, we had both salaried and hourly people, right, who did not necessarily work 8-hour shifts. Your request for time off form should include a place where they indicate how many hours they're actually asking you to pay them. So, and that would depend on how much they have banked as well.
Right. I guess. Yeah. If they're having surgery or something foreseeable, I understand that. But I think I can speak for everybody is that what we're worried about is it's 8 o'clock in the morning and Joe's not here.
Right.
And now he's calling in. What do we pay him for that day?
When Joe comes back in, he should submit a request for paid time off if he wants that. And, maybe I'm wrong. But
That's where Joe's average, is that where we do Joe's average that he normally works? Because he's not an 8-hour, 40-hour-a-week guy?
Right, so it would depend on what Joe's shift was supposed to be had he showed up. So it's actual time worked. If we're looking at retroactively actual time worked, you don't have to do an average, but if you're looking prospectively, if Joe's calling in for a shift he hasn't worked, it would be for the shift that he was scheduled for.
And the amount of hours he was scheduled for that day.
Okay, scheduled. Because what if Joe was supposed to go home first that day? And Matt had to stay to cover the entire shift. Does Joe now get that, hey, would have got sent home early 4.5 hour? Now I'm just making numbers up, but do you see what I'm saying? Because somebody has to stay to cover that shift.
Right. And I
so
think
they're not going to get 8 hours of pay when they would never even be there 8 hours.
Right. And I think it's kind of, you got to look at it is they have 40 hours and how they use it. I mean, if they use it up, for one shift, it's still deducting. I mean, you're still going to have to calculate and use that 40 hours. So they take 6 hours or 8 hours, doesn't matter, they have 40 hours. So at the end, it's still a wash. So,
And in that sense, I would, if you have a problem employee, I would suggest getting some kind of agreement. You know, you were scheduled for 4.5 hours. This is the amount of time I'm going to pay you for. You know, do you agree with that? And have them sign off on it, so you don't get a challenge later. Or can we agree that, you know, on a typical Wednesday we'd send you home after 3 hours, and that's what I'm going to pay you for? Do you agree to that? Have them initial it.
All right, we got a question over here.
I don't know if it's as much a question, but we own a state-funded agency, so we don't have the luxury of raising a price because they set the price that they're going to pay us. And I read in there that there is something that they should increase, but do you know or have any idea the time limit that they should have or will have to increase our rates? Because it specifically lists the home and community-based services in there, and if you work with Medicaid and Access, but we can't raise their prices, but we still have to increase wages.
I don't understand your question. I'm sorry.
So in the restaurant, they're raising prices to compensate for the additional wages that they're paying. We are contracted with the state. They set the rate that they're going to pay me, so I've had to increase our wages, but I don't have a way to increase what the state is paying me.
Sure. So,
Well, there is an area, I was just curious if you were familiar with the area, because in Prop 206, it specifically talks about home and community-based services, caregivers, and the state's responsibility to increase the rate.
right, and I haven't seen that. I haven't seen any indication of how that'll be implemented. So you're absolutely right. You can't be raising. You know, you're contracted for a particular reimbursement rate with the state, and so increasing that wouldn't be an option unless you were to renegotiate your contract, of course. But yeah, how you'll be recouping that other than changing the number of employees, I don't know.
Before I get to the next question, I think for nonprofits in the room, there are some questions about state funding and different things like that. I think a lot of that is going to be battled out in the next session over how much additional funding might be given to certain nonprofits that receive it. So although it's not up to you on how much you're getting in and how much you're paying, that might change in the next session coming up. So we had one over here before I get here really quickly.
And you can email me about that later if you want. I'm happy to look into it for you.
So just to, not to backtrack, but going back to like the restaurant scenario where you've got shifts scheduled and then varying actual shifts worked, I mean, would it be safe to say from a legal perspective that probably the most conservative thing to do on our end is just to draft that in our policy? So you accrue this much sick time paid, and when you do get that reimbursement, it's based on your scheduled shift, and then that's blanketed, and that's what it is. Because everybody works a varied shift in a restaurant, so I mean, I'm just wondering from your point of view, does that sound like the safer way to go with it?
Yes, and so I would encourage everyone to have you have to have a written policy, and you have to share that written policy. It's got to be posted. You have to share it with your employees. Most important thing, you'd be shocked at the number of cases I have where employers have great policies and they don't follow them. And so just make sure you follow them, go back to them, have someone responsible for enforcing them.
I have a quick question. The way I read the law is that you can require employees to give notice if they're out for 3 consecutive days. Maybe I read that wrong. But if that's correct, so how do you prevent the person that has the hangover and calls in sick? I'm just wondering what everyone's thinking about, and then said, oh yeah, I was sick, and they don't have to provide any documentation for that.
Well, but they do though, and you're entitled to request it because it's got to be a qualified leave. And being hungover, unless it results in some kind of malady, is not a qualified leave.
So you're saying that the way you're reading the law is that you can require documentation on the first day. Even if you could, the employee can provide their own statement, the way I'm reading it too. So it's like, how do you get around it? I mean,
if I can jump in there, here's something that we deal with this all the time, and we've had to build policies around the stomach flu scenario.
Bad sushi.
Maricopa County, the health department requires people that serve food and alcohol and beverages and things like that to make sure that they do not cause a outbreak of foodborne illness. So we've used that to our advantage that if you're calling in saying that you're throwing up and you can't get sick, well, you got to give me a doctor's note that you're cleared to come back to work, because we cannot have the liability that you come back to work and get everybody, sick. So we've worked around that, and that reduces the brain damage that we have with the people that just stayed up all night, Yeah.
Right, and so getting back to your question, documentation signed by a healthcare professional indicating that earns paid sick time is necessary shall be considered reasonable documentation. So I would say in response to that, anything short of that arguably is not reasonable. Again, if we're talking about 3 consecutive days of leave. So the employee's self-validating statement would be insufficient, I would argue.
Okay, so you're saying that it does say 3 days that you can require it? But
Yes.
so you couldn't do it for, back to your point, boy, I've got, the flu or whatever. But you're saying it's more of a health issue. So
It
you're
is.
overriding that with a 3-day by saying, hey, we can't really have you work with food if you're sick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's actually like a form that you can get from the
Maricopa.
environmental services.
Perfect.
That we have them sign them when they sign up.
Once they throw up or have a fever or diarrhea, it's 2 dadays minimum.
Exactly.
You have to come back, you have to be cleared by a doctor. And
Yep.
you pre-screen your employee when they come on. There's 5 things you can't have and work.
Yep.
And there's forms for it. And if you're on the cutting edge with the health department, this is all, you go through it all. But once they say they have diarrhea, they throw up or have a fever, they have to take 2 days off, they have to be cleared by a doctor to come back to work. This has curtailed some of the level of symptoms of my ill employees.
Same with our staff. That's why we went ahead and took a very conservative approach, because it was costing hardship on the business to have somebody that just wasn't being responsible. So.
I just had a question. I don't have a restaurant. I have retail. So I was wondering if any other people in the room who have retail have plans to try to recoup some of this increased expenses in their business and how they're doing it, because like a lot of other retail businesses, we can't change our prices as easily as a restaurant. So I'm wondering if any other retail businesses have a plan and if they would be willing to share that.
The irony of all this, is, of course, is that your customers are the voters who passed this prop. And so there's got to be some, if they want to be consistent, there's got to be some understanding that, the cost has to be passed along to some degree, especially for small businesses.
Sure, I'll touch on that really quickly. For the retail side, we were going to have one of the owners of Changing Hands Bookstore here today, but unfortunately they had something come up and couldn't make it last minute. But of the conversations that we had with them before, one of the things that they're kind of looking at is they paid higher than minimum wage before for their type of employees that they were recruiting, and they had that competitive advantage over other types of places that were similar to them, maybe even their national bookstores that paid less, because they provided a better incentive, better pay, and attracted a better type of employee because of that. So now that wages overall are increasing for everyone, regardless of whether they would like to raise them or not, looking at different strategies for how they continue to create those incentives to attract higher level employees, the same ones that they have been recruiting already, through different types of benefits and different things like that. It's completely different from retail. You can't offer a free meal like a restaurant might be able to, and those different types of things. So the benefits might be different, but it's about finding those unique ways to create those incentives to attract those type of employees that you have been to this point. And I do also have a quick question for Matt, and maybe Doug and Julie might be able to touch on it too. There's, for restaurants in the room, and I mean, there's lots of different ways that you can implement price changes. There's surcharges you can do on the check. You can wipe away tips and do and then include 20% on each bill, and say that this is going to the tips of your specific types of employees and all those different types of things. Could any of you touch on why you decided to go the route that you did? Matt, what maybe some of the legalities are behind what you have to state on the check for where that money is actually going to and that different kind of stuff?
I'll just say quickly that my main concern with that as a consumer and as a lawyer would be getting hit with a surcharge that I wasn't previously provided notice of. So in other words, if that's going to happen, if that's the way you want to recoup some of these costs, I would want some kind of notice, either posted in some kind of discreet way, obviously without scaring off your customers. But the surcharge couldn't be too large. In other words, I mean, we all expect to get some kind of mandatory gratuity if the party's large enough, et cetera. But that would be something I wouldn't expect, and if it were large enough, you would get some complaints on that.
And Julie, why did you decide to go the route that you did? Yeah.
Actually, we talked about service charges, and then when we dug deeper into it, there's actually more taxes associated with surcharges. So for me, it was like not a good option. The other part of it too, and this model of the everybody makes $20 an hour, and it's an interesting idea, but what I found at Otro, we used to do tip pool, and so everybody would tip pool. The server assistants would get a certain percentage, and then the bartenders and the servers would tip pool together, and then we would break it up by hour. But the issue is that it does not. You hope the peer pressure helps everybody be on the same page, but it doesn't. You have people that weigh that down, that don't perform as well. So to me, there's more incentive for them to be able to potentially make 25% or 22% on a check and really work hard for it versus just have this blanket flat rate and they're guaranteed a certain amount whether they work hard or not.
Ditto. We've thought about doing the tip pooling thing too. I've read a lot of articles. They're getting rid of tipping in some restaurants, big markets like New York. But just like Doug said, you'll get the ones that don't want to perform. And when you're in a busy rush, you need people with their hands full, both directions, to and from the kitchen, so you can get it all done and helping each other as well. And we kind of try to build that sort of camaraderie at Mother Bunch too.
Cool. So we got time for maybe a couple more questions, and then I have one last one to close it up.
Okay, we're not a restaurant, and we have over 100 employees, and in the summer probably closer to 175. We employ a lot of young people that are in high school, that are on their break from college. And probably 50% of our staff are going to be affected by this minimum wage hike. People that are in the 8 to 10 already, and a lot of people that are in the 10 to 12. And I'm wondering if anybody has a plan to, when this happens, put out something about what a new expectations, because you're making $2 more an hour and you did nothing to earn it, and if. And then you have the people that are at 10 now. That what do you do? It's like I said, 50% of our staff are somewhat affected. So then you've got the people that are earning 10 saying, "Well, why am I still earning 10 when, this 16-year-old kid that just..." And we to add to that, we take about 4 weeks to train our staff. So for 4 weeks, we're not necessarily recouping anything on that, so they're doubled up. So there's a lot of money invested in these kids, and so I'm just wondering how people are, letting the expectations out.
So to recap really quickly, I heard two questions out of there. The first is, does the minimum wage apply to training new employees, Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah, the second they're hired. And then second is, if our panelists or anybody else in the room might have implemented any or are going to implement any type of public announcements or educational type notifications to their customers or clients on the staff. Okay.
Tomorrow you're getting a $2 raise.
For doing nothing.
And
Well, then some of your workers.
So raising expectations for your staff, potentially? Okay.
Is somebody, because, I mean, do you bring it to everybody's attention and then have all the people that are at the 10 say, wait a minute, I didn't even realize this was going on, and, you know, I'm just kind of...
So educating your staff on the changes that are coming, how it affects them, and what you expect more of them, potentially. Doug?
You know, I think that to me, you know, more of the ownership is on us to make sure that we have extremely high standards. You know, we shouldn't settle. I don't like to settle, especially, you know, considering that I was a dishwasher when I first started out in the restaurant business, worked my way through college, worked full-time, went to college. You know, I've worked 70 hours a week to get this far. And no one should get a break in your company. They're entitled to these new benefits, but they're also entitled to work hard and earn that. You know, and it is difficult to motivate, you know, people to work hard. I look at in my own situation, the one thing that was drilled into me is, as a chef, you know, we tend to be a little bit strict and militant sometimes, but your systems set you free. And so your employee's only as good as the checks and balances you have for them. So, you know, for me, you know, here's your workload. This is the amount of work that you need to get done. This is your checklist. And you make sure that you train your managers and your core team to make sure that they're the coaches. They're there to make sure that they hit all those points and to get them as close to that. And from there, you can measure performance. And from there, you establish 30-day evaluations, 90-day evaluations, 6 months, and 1 year, because it gives you all the opportunities to make sure that you get low-performer people out of your business, because those are the things that hurt us the most. And, you know, it is the one thing that challenges us the most, as well as paying the rent, is making sure that, you know, you have the right people on board. And if anything, because there's this increase, you should be more selective on the people that you bring on, and because you have that right.
Yeah, I mean, but that's easy to say now, but we're already staffed with, you know, these people. We've got a lot of money into the training of them. So, you know, that's easy. Do you, I mean, it's like, what do? Do you cut the 16-year-old, even though they're, well, you know, we're in a weird.
Well, I mean, are you addressing the issue with, are you able to increase your services or what you're doing? You're not. So you're fixed. Okay. So, you know, the other flip side of this, you know, to me, you know, we're kind of stuck with, you know, we have X amount of employees. I know that I'm not going to be able to have less than 15 employees. The other part of it is, how do I grow my business? You know, how can I now turn around and go, okay, well, we're a $1.9 million restaurant. How do we turn it into a $2.5 million restaurant? And so now we're looking and going, okay, let's take on catering. Let's take on, you know, events. Let's look at our marketing. And so you have to kind of figure out like where you're going and make sure that you plan for growth, because I think that's what's going to stabilize your business as well, even if you're stuck on a fixed price. But, you know, that to me is also what your competition is doing anyway.
Yeah, but I guess I'm going back to more the employee morale sort of issue, though, is how this affects employee morale for those people that are already, you know, at that 10 right now, that we can't afford to bring them all them to 12 and bring everybody up, you know, through for, you know, 100 plus people. So, yeah, I'm more thinking about employee morale and how that's going to affect.
Got it.
We'll have a new population of workers who are now making minimum wage who weren't before. They were making over minimum wage. So that's back to your morale issue.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's how are people dealing with that? And
I don't think anybody's dealt with it yet, but it's a good question.
It is.
I would say fully transparent to your team
Right.
and explaining the policy that this has changed, that everyone knows about it, because if they find out and you didn't tell them, then they're going to be more upset. But also letting them know that this is just letting them know that this is a business and that you're trying to succeed in business and that they have jobs because of the way that this pay structure is set. And if you raise everyone, this may put you out of business. They need to know that they may lose their job if you raise everybody up. You can raise them accordingly, but based off performance. That would be my thought on it.
And I'm sorry, due to time, we've got to get to our last questions back here, so we have one more.
Two quick questions on paid sick time. Is there a boilerplate policy out there to start with? And two, can we require a certain amount of time for them to put in for it, or can they call in 15 minutes before their shift and say, I'm using my sick time?
So first question, is there a boilerplate policy? No, although you could probably draft one yourself as long as you're following the black letter of the statute. We've done a few for clients, again, not being implemented for some time yet. As far as notice, again, the statute requires that notice be given to the employer if the reason is foreseeable, and that's going to be a fighting topic. Is it foreseeable or not? If it's not foreseeable, I don't know that you want to have that argument with your employee unless they have 10 reasons in a row that are, arguably not foreseeable. Then you may have an issue. And again, document this. If you don't have personnel files, keep personnel files, written files. That kind of stuff.
But your policy, your next bullet point says that if it's a written policy requiring prior notice, what does that mean? Your employee handbook? How does that work with that other bullet point if you can give notice?
So for those on listening on video right now, the question is where that policy needs to be placed in your employee handbook or something like that?
I have it in my request time off where, if as soon as they start feeling ill, whether it's the night before, they have to give us as much notice as possible. The minimum 3 hours. That's what we require. Now, for us, if they're calling 15 minutes before their shift and they're sick, then they're going against our policy and we write them up. We're going to excuse the time off and we're not going to take away anything or do anything like that, but they did break our policy and not giving us enough notice, and we have every right to write them up for that.
Great, and I'm sorry for those that still had questions, but due to time, we are going to have to wrap up. If we could just go, Julie and Doug, for just to close the session today, and you will have access to this video afterwards, and then you'll be able to stay behind and ask some questions for a couple minutes if you have any. But if you could give just one piece of advice on all of the local businesses in the room and all the local businesses in the Local First Network across Arizona, because we have people from Tucson, even up in Flagstaff, that are going to be watching this afterwards. If you give a piece of advice on how to set a strategy in place for your business in implementing new changes and that different kind of thing, how do you continue to attract that same loyal customer base with these added costs and different things like that? How are you going to plan to do that in the coming years?
I think actually you said it best, be transparent. Make sure that you're upfront. Make sure that for us, our staff needs to be able to explain to a customer why our pricing increased. And, once again, somebody else made the point that the citizens of Arizona voted this measure in place. And lots of people that I've kind of talked to about it and have, some of my regulars, hey, this is coming. They've all been like, I'd pay $1 more for these folks to be compensated. As far as morale would go, I would look at who your key employees are and the ones you want to keep, and if maybe you don't have to give them the full $2, but give them something or some kind of benefit, and maybe look at what your labor costs are and how you can utilize those folks more efficiently.
I ditto on that. I think, transparency is extremely important. And the other part of it is we're not doing this in a vacuum. It's not just happening to us. It's happening all the way across the board. So, you know, I think everybody's going to be adjusting to that, and it's a new reality. It's you know, we're all going to have increases in our services and in our product. So people will expect that, and it will normalize over time. So for me, you know, I purposely have kept my menu prices lower than I should. I use a lot of organic and local purveyors and growers, and you know, we've had higher food costs, but now it's time to kind of, you know, start getting some credit on the fact that we're using that. We're a little bit more established, and we should be confident because, you know, ultimately, you know, I think sometimes when you're a small business, you think I'm going to beat the big guy by, you know, undercutting myself, and that's actually the worst thing you can do. If anything, look at those big players and go, how am I going to adapt my marketing to compete with them? Because we can take market advantage. And I think, like, to me, look at building sales, look at growing your business, and I think that all these other issues will resolve themselves.
Great. And the last thing that I would add for all of our members of Local First Arizona is that if your clients and customers don't know yet that you are a locally owned business, it's your responsibility to make sure that they know. Print off on the bottom of your receipts, you are supporting a locally owned business. 4 times more money is staying in Arizona. Every person that walks through that door, if you're a brick and mortar, you should be saying thank you for supporting a locally owned business. Take that Local First Arizona logo, put it on your website, put it on your social media, put it on your window. Make sure that everybody knows that they are supporting a local business that is implementing new changes and needs the support, the ongoing support of your customers and your clients. Being proud locally owned businesses is going to help you hugely throughout this whole process. And so if you need any more information on added resources that Local First Arizona can give you and marketing ideas and those different types of things, you are more than welcome to reach out to us. I'd like to take a moment. Can we thank all of our panelists for being here today? For everybody in the room and everyone watching statewide, we want to thank you for being members of Local First Arizona. And if you need anything else, you can reach out to us on our website and ask any additional questions, and we can connect you to any of our members that may be able to collaborate with you or create strategies with you. So thank you all for being here today, and have a great rest of your week.